Good evening. It is really an honor to be here today. As Daria mentioned, it's rare that I get to speak to SREs. I'm predominantly speaking at security conferences inside of echo chambers for people who are really great at finding problems. And so it's a nice change to speak with the folks who are actually solving problems. A real quick opener here, show of hands for folks who have actually been on a security incident bridge. All right, trigger warning. Today we're gonna be having a fireside chat and I'm gonna go over some life experiences around security incidents that I've led or have gone through myself. It's a fireside chat, and so some visual iconography here represents that, but it seems that I'm in good company. A lot of my time, I sort of feel like we're the marshmallows. So who am I and why do you actually care? If you don't recognize my name and you don't recognize my voice, it's probably a good thing and you're missing some of those trigger warnings. As one of my coworkers recently reminded me, JR, when you walk through the halls and you make eye contact with me, I have a Pavlovian response where my blood pressure spikes and my pulse quickens because we're so constantly working together on incident-related matters, and it's not a conscious thing that happens. So I have spent the last 20 years of my career plus working in different online services and predominantly working in spaces where I either am inside of the SRE org or part of the live site teams. I've been building security organizations and security programs in some of the largest organizations delivering cloud services or cloud platforms. Where I started, however, is as a builder, and it's a really core part of my being. My origin into my professional career started at an internet service provider in California. And we'll kick off with a little bit of a taste on some of the storytelling as I sort of share experiences from that space. So as I mentioned, the security industry and security practitioners tend to have a different flavor of ways of thinking of things. And in that can be some hubris. One of my earliest incidents that I responded to was on behalf of a customer. My internet service provider that I worked for had a colo facility where large, various different customers operated their hosting out of that space. And of course, this is a long, long time ago in an internet far, far away where you got on it via the screeching of robots over modems and not broadband internet. We had hosted a very early intrusion detection software service. And we got a panicked call into the ISP that they were under attack. They were down and the attackers knew that they were a security company, and so they targeted them and took them offline. And they needed the ISP's help to be able to go in to troubleshoot and figure out what type of traffic was hitting them and causing them so much trouble. So my early career as a network administrator, I dutifully went into the facility and opened a span port to the corresponding rack that the equipment lived in, and acknowledged that there was quite a lot of traffic saturating their pipe. That traffic uniformly seemed to be, interestingly, port 25. It's a very strange thing to see a bunch of SMTP mail filling up someone's pipe. And after turning on TCP dump to see what was inside of it, it was all mail destined for root at idscompany.com. And so the lesson here was that the security company had pushed out an update to all of their customers all over the world so that every alert that was ever received would go to their own root at domain.com, and they had flooded themselves unintentionally with a self-inflicted wound. And so this, again, is a reflection of security liking to put attribution around malice or some other nefarious purpose as to a downtime or a negative effect, when usually it's a Halcyon's razor issue that there's some sort of incompetency or some sort of easier explanation as to the disaster. At the same organization, we actually had Michael Jackson take down California's internet. It's a very strange world we get to live in. I was based out of Santa Barbara, where this ISP is located, and you may recall that Michael Jackson got into some legal trouble and was arrested. Well, when you're arrested, people put up your mugshot because that's public information. And we were in Santa Barbara, where Michael Jackson's house was part of the county. Well, it turns out that all of the news media all over the world decided to share the sheriff's website that hosted the photograph of the mugshot, which brought down the internet for the Southern California area because of a condition that we used to call slashdotting. This is a long, long time ago, again, before Akamai, before CDNs, where images and various other content were hosted directly. And if the news media actually posted to it, it would take it all the way to your front door. And unfortunately, the sheriff's office did not actually have enough bandwidth at their particular interface, and that caused a flooding that spread throughout the rest of the infrastructure until we turned it down. So again, these are different manifestations of crises that occur that have different sorts of impetus around them. And the importance that I'm trying to drive is around having a contextual understanding of what's actually happening to be able to respond to these types of things when the unexpected occurs. So if you haven't been able to tell yet, this fireside chat is really around story time. And I think Keel spoke earlier today around the importance of sharing stories to be able to drive messaging. And I feel very, very strongly about that as well, because we can't learn from problems we don't know that we have. Otherwise, we're subject to experiencing them directly. So today I'm going to talk about a number of different scenarios that, again, have occurred in my context that have partnerships or different interactions with the live site operators or the SREs involved. And we'll go through a number of different bullets, but we'll come to items that were lessons learned on what to avoid. We'll talk about what is actually working and what to keep doing as a result of it. And then some more recent learnings that I had around what to watch out for as the global influence of policies and regulations shape the processes, the tools, and the technology that we have to utilize to be able to deliver on these various different tasks before us. So, what should we be avoiding? We need to be cognizant of the gaps and the conflicts between the two families within SRE and within security, particularly around the types of priorities that we have. It's in the name, site reliability engineering. Uptime is essential. The SLA and the SLO are critical. However, what happens when the uptime is actually playing against all of your customers because the data that they entrusted into you is being exfiltrated right out of the bottom of that online service? These are places where we need to be finding ways to better communicate, to break down silos, and to anticipate how to navigate layers 8 and 9 on the political and financial spectrum. Moving forward a little bit in time from my ISP days, I worked at an organization who was responsible for a SaaS delivering And it was not your typical web-based HTTP sort of web app. Instead, we were responsible for real-time protocols, audio and video, screen sharing, and remote control. The benefits that we alluded to earlier around things that have static pictures or other content is that you can have a CDN front load that for you. And the rest of the internet or the assailants don't necessarily need to know precisely where your IP is out on the internet. It's a little different when you're running real-time streaming protocols because those are direct connections back to the back-end infrastructure. So the story sort of begins with an unexpected afternoon where we have a Juniper router suddenly go offline. The environment was built for HA, and so there were load balancing pairs of all redundant infrastructure in the networking stack. And so, as it was designed to do, the standby Juniper router picked up the slack and continued to deliver the traffic. A few moments later, that Juniper router went down right as the other one was coming back up. The SRE team responded to this by getting the networking group involved to be able to troubleshoot the crash that was occurring and causing a live site issue. At this point, there's starting to be some impact to customer delivery in terms of the services that are really dependent upon things like latency and availability, e.g. the video and voice for meeting software. As the primary ISG came back up, the firewall proceeded to rejoin the OSPF network. And part of the challenge here is that when you have significant flapping in OSPF, you can end up having a problem with LSA storms. And shortly after that firewall came back up, it went down again, and then we teeter-tottered back and forth, causing a huge storm to occur throughout the production network. These environments were in physical data centers that predated the cloud and the availability zones that we take advantage of today. And in this particular configuration, we had multiple different data centers hosting multiple different production services, lines of business that were different product offerings. And in order to be able to scale to fail, the primary data centers operated as secondary data centers for various different services. So if one service had a significant issue, an earthquake or a flood or a fire, they could simply move that service into the other data center in another part of the world, and they would run with two concurrent products in one DC at a time. While this flapping was occurring, the SREs treated it as an availability incident and as a live site issue. And so myself and the other security practitioners were not alerted to the fact that this was going on. Following the playbook, the head of operations at the time was not able to get a satisfactory answer from the networking team as to why the firewalls kept crashing and failing over to one another and flooding the network. And thus they concluded that it must be something local to that data center. So they follow their playbook, which says if you have a problem in one data center, you fail over production into your standby. And so they went ahead and did that. And now you have two products that are now down, because suddenly the failover data center is also running the same ISG firewalls that are now beginning to flap and causing storming in their space. It was around this time that customer support reached out to me. My wife at the time worked in customer support And I had established a very good rapport with all of the managers and many of the leads within the customer support org to be a conduit of information. Otherwise, there weren't really natural interactions between the customer support staff and the live site operators that manage the production environment. And so I got a tap over instant message that said, hey, we have a very strange chat support ticket that came in, and it's in sort of broken English, but it sounds like something that you need to take a look at. And so I went over to the customer support area and inquired what was so interesting about this technical support chat that they were experiencing. And it turns out that there was a person on the other end of that taking credit for the fact that our products were down. They were actually performing a network-based attack against our company and were trying to extort money and asking level 1 tech support to give them funds. So we have multiple products down. We have firewalls that are now storming and causing data center saturation, and some individual out on the internet interacting with our customer support team, letting them know that they were the ones actually behind it. This is when security could actually get engaged and to start having conversations with the production staff around this particular issue. This event actually went on for more than a couple days, and there were cots brought in from camping supply stores so that different staff could sleep in their offices to be able to try to troubleshoot and support the initiative. This is where I come up with the phrase architecture through incident. The team had built their production infrastructure with the border routers physically connected to the firewalls. The firewalls did not have the support for trunking, and so there was no way to be able to plug them into a switch to allow for them to represent multiple different zones. And so because of this, you end up having this direct path from the internet down into the firewall before it gets to load balancers and any other pieces of infrastructure on the inside of the environment. Well, because of this incident, we had to completely re-architect that design and place the load balancers up ahead of the firewalls to be able to ensure that these problems wouldn't occur in the future. It also turned out that the firewalls themselves were out of date. They weren't broke, so no one was fixing them. And they were end-of-lifed. So the bugs that were inside of them couldn't actually be fixed, no matter how much anyone wanted them. They actually needed to be physically removed from racks and replaced. And so this is a lesson around the consequences of technical debt and the manifestation of the piper when it appears and having to pay it. So the lesson here is around the conflicting priorities in uptime versus containment. In this particular case, it was important to allow that singular service to be down and to make the call to allow that service to be down instead of failing over. The issue was exacerbated by following playbooks that conflicted with the security playbooks that would have isolated and tried to find a way to solve the localized issue before it expanded. I have another example that's a little bit more recent that we actually had a company that I worked for and led security operations for with a threat actor inside the environment, digitally in this case. We were paid a visit by Lapsus, which you may have heard about in the news a couple of years back, who had a fun run against many of the large organizations out on the internet. But in our case, the issue manifested as an entire fleet of VMs suddenly starting to get turned off or erased, just full-blown deallocated and deleted. And this particular event went on for several hours, assuming that it was, again, a availability incident. This is where SREs and the online production staff were trying to understand whether or not they had a bad maintenance job or some other bug in a script that had gone haywire and started taking things out. SRE had their full incident bridge going. They were trying to bring the service back up as best as they could from backup. And the security team was unawares, again, in this scenario. When we inquired with the SREs where the different traffic was originating from to be able to try to help them find the script that had gone haywire or the maintenance job that was causing issues, they were able to provide IP addresses that were associated with the interactions that sent the signal. The security staff, as mentioned a little bit earlier, had cyber threat intelligence feeds and partners that could tell us whether or not different IP addresses show up as being used in other malicious scenarios in other cases in the world. And it was at that time, when I had the IP addresses, I could indeed confirm that they were in use as IOCs by the Lapsus threat actor group. And that it wasn't a rogue script, it wasn't a maintenance job that was causing issues, it was actually hands-on keyboard, a hacker, infiltrating the network and then deliberately destroying infrastructure. In this particular case, they managed to saw off the branch that they were standing on because some of the networking connectivity that was being provided to them for remote access was actually hosted in VMs that they had just turned off. And so they self-evicted themselves for us to be able to do cleanup. And cleanup we did because we did find the paper trail around how they got in, but only after the fact when we were able to partner and share information to be able to understand that a live site incident actually had a different impetus around the reason for the availability issue. This is where it's super important to be able to develop pivots in both playbooks between security and availability that is run by the incident responders on SRE. While we were trying to bring up some of our infrastructure, it needed to be validated that the threat actors weren't still inside of the machines and have the ability to exfiltrate data or to continue to proliferate the destruction of infrastructure. And so this is a very challenging time when you have a push and a pull between the two entities who, again, want to maintain uptime versus the containment issues around the safety of the data that lives inside the systems. Having playbook triggers and making sure that there's awareness between the two groups around when a security incident or when an availability incident occurs allows for better continuity and it allows for better context around what's happening with the environment. Severity and urgency are an important factor in these cases as well. Security may have similar looking or similar sounding methodologies in their incident response process, but unless you are the one speaking with them to compare notes, they may actually vary significantly so that someone's SEV1 or their SEV0 does not equal your SEV1 or SEV0. And when they go to marshal resources, there's misalignment around how urgent and how much priority should be given to those various different encounters. And so I implore you to begin these types of conversations with your counterparts in security to find ways to align and to be able to have common languages to speak around playbooks, severity, and urgencies to be able to support the live site that is delivering experiences to customers. Cost and impact is another one of these examples where we have professionals who spend all day thinking about what needs to stay on and why and how much it costs the company. if those services go down and which customers are going to be the ones calling, asking for recompense as a result of missed SLAs. Security teams tend to have a foggy idea around the cost of an impact, and the beauty is that you can team together to be able to harmonize those lexicons and be able to speak the same language to leadership when you have an issue that occurs that either takes out infrastructure that's customer dependent, or it takes away operators from doing other activities that they would normally be performing. And the SRE teams tend to have these metrics fairly well dialed in, and you have the power to be able to help merge those languages together. Oh, learning to dance in a burning room. The term here is really about people responding to an issue and trying to be in sequence like a dance. And throughout that, there will be toe-stepping and there will be miscoordination as you try to do this complex maneuver. And so the term that I use with leadership and others to be able to bridge those gaps is really around trying to dance in a burning room. It helps to be able to know the steps ahead of time before you go into that room where everything's fine. All right, that was an example of times gone wrong where we misaligned and didn't communicate effectively between each other. I want to share one where we actually did significantly communicate and partner around an issue that both parties saw clearly, but had trouble being able to articulate to leadership and to the check signers that something needed to be done that was fairly difficult. All right, so let me introduce some terms just to make sure that folks are familiar with them. I've not heard it outside of a particular company in Redmond, but we came up with the term hobo to be able to describe something that was unlike infrastructure as a service, and unlike platform as a service, and unlike software as a service. And hobo stands for hosted on behalf of. It's a practice by which you essentially give someone infrastructure and you allow them to have full root access on it in your environment and on your systems, but then you're still responsible for all the mishaps that they perform because you're hosting this service on their behalf, and you've given them more access than fits inside of the standard shared responsibility model that we all commonly see around IaaS. Server-side request forgeries involves tricking an inside device into making a call on your behalf in order to get a result back. Dad says it was okay, so mom provides the cookies or vice versa. And then bespoke telemetry is something that is only possible between the partnerships in security and SRE. So in this particular case, we had a very nefarious bug or design flaw present in some of the communications that took place in the back end to be able to share different parts of metadata in information. A fairly high-profile case occurred in the form of Capital One experiencing quite a news story around an incident that they experienced because of particular flaws that were exploited by an ex-employee making server-side request forgeries in their back end. We had discovered in our space that there were similar issues in the designs for our back end, and they were not publicly known at the time. And so because these flaws were unknown, there were challenges in getting prioritization and the urgency to be able to correct them. Both SRE and security recognized that there is no security through obscurity, and that we were living on borrowed time. I was able to partner between my team and the SREs on the cloud platform side to be able to create distinct telemetry that actually proved that calls were, impossible calls could be made through the SSRF type flaws that we had seen elsewhere in the industry. And this was something that we had to partner with their leadership for, because they had different charter to be able to provide different objectives and projects, whereas this was some out of the left field request from the security team. And we were able to incentivize management to be able to make that some of their key objectives to be able to deliver on. And so as some time passed, we were able to see those alerts starting to light up, and confirmed that we did not have just a theoretical issue. We actually had a real demonstratable issue that was taking place in the wild. Fortunately for us, it was security researchers that were playing around with the electrified fences, trying to find weaknesses in them, and had successfully managed to start getting a proof of concept built by the time that we reached out to them. And we were only able to do so because of that strong partnership between the security team and SRE to have the understanding and the context of the environment to be able to provide that instrumentation and that telemetry needed to be able to make that case. Thankfully, in this particular instance, the architects had already been hard at work on providing a proof of concept or providing a proposal on how to be able to re-architect the system as a result of this understood flaw. And so when the time came to be able to discuss the reality that we needed to take action, they were ready with the various different suggestions on exactly how to take care of that. And so my messaging here for SRE is context is key. You hold the information that the security teams typically overlook or are far removed from, because their world is typically looking at anomalies and ways the system shouldn't work, and don't necessarily have an in-tune understanding about how it is supposed to work and whether or not there's a missing gap to be able to cover. The incentivization of cooperation is paramount. Many times that security reaches out to talk to live site operators or developers, asking them to do a thing because there's a zero-day flaw or because there's some other issue, these asks tend to come at the cost of other commitments that the SRE and the live site operators and the developers have already committed to. And management, when it comes time to talk about the yearly bonus or the performance review of that individual, can perceive these interruptions as a distraction around what that person is actually supposed to do. And I have taken it on my side to be able to talk to leadership where I have worked to make sure that we incentivize and give credit to the work that goes into fixing these issues, either as an incident response or emergency maintenance, as is required with certain types of defects and vulnerabilities. And again, it is important to make sure that we're ready with proposals, because after you present an issue, it's no good to anyone unless you can present the solution to that issue. And management's very good about falling on deaf ears to take change if you don't have anything to share with them. And so in this particular case, again, security and SRE were partnered to understand the nature of the flaw and the ability to be able to resolve it. We talked about dancing in a burning room, and this is really around building under duress. So something happened that I have never experienced in my career before, where we had to build and invent an entire service out of thin air during the course of an incident. Normally you have sprints and you get to have designs and you build towards those designs and you iterate and you release to production after it's gone through a staging. And in this case, a lot of that had to be hurried. The reason for this was a typical story that I'm sure many of you have heard or probably even experienced yourselves. A significant, important data store was exposed to the internet because of public storage permissions issues, and data went out into the world. Well, in my case, we were able to resolve that issue within hours and get the aforementioned data off the internet, at least to stop further exposure. But at that point, the damage had been done. We had been reached out to by a security researcher letting us know that they had exfiltrated the data, had been starting to mine it, and it appeared as though it was many, many years, over a decade's worth of support data around all of the support cases involved with the company. And so it graduated into something that required disclosure under GDPR and other privacy regulations. And so while the containment of the original incident was done, we had now just begun our journey to be able to deliver the information that the customers and the downstream customers needed to be able to take action upon that info. And so in this case, the incident response team had to work across the divide with SRE and customer support and development to be able to create a cloned database of all of the information that had been exfiltrated and to be able to match those particular data types with the actual customers that were impacted. This was compounded by the fact that the data itself was scrubbed per GDPR rules so that it was not identifiable back to the original customer in the plain text. And so it required a significant amount of toil through data analysis to be able to attach those individual cases back to customers. And so we worked with the support staff to be able to create a service that allowed for the customer care team to be able to validate an individual's identity and then match them with the particular data type that had been exposed to be able to share that with them. But this took weeks of development time under duress that was not planned for and was quite out of context for the standard development lifecycle. And so as we continue to have these various different external pressures from regulations and from contractual commitments, it's important for us not only to think about the technology and the uptime associated with it, but also the various different commitments we have when something goes wrong around the information contained in those systems, and to make sure that we're able to develop very rapidly around the problem solves and having the data analysis on hand to be able to meet those requirements. And so to close up, we talked about the context that SRE has being absolutely critical and typically a missing point from the security team's perspective on where they sit in the world. We talked about learning to dance in a burning room and the importance of being able to coordinate those steps ahead of time so that there's less toe-stepping and misalignment during a crisis. And we briefly spoke around building under duress, where you need to be thinking about how to expedite some of the delivery because regulations may have timelines that supersede your SLAs or your SLOs around when you are required to disclose various different pieces of information to the customers or third parties that have been impacted. And so with that, I want to thank you very much for your time. It has been an honor and a pleasure to be able to speak with you today, and thank you again.